Everybody, welcome back. We've been off for 2 weeks, but now we have episode 14 of our COVID-19 webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about a data-driven return, COVID's impact on the workforce. And we have Simon Davis, who's going to moderate today's session. But before I pass it over to him to introduce himself and our expert panelists, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. So everybody's been muted for audio quality purposes. And as all the other past episodes, you can find everything in our IFMA.org Coronavirus Resource Center. Go to IFMA.org/coronavirus. We'll have the full recording of this episode, all past episodes, and a lot of other helpful information at that URL. Also, Newmark has provided a COVID-19 situation report as a free handout, so you can download that from your go-to panel. And as we've done with all of our past episodes, and we plan to do in this session as well, we have an extended audience Q&A where we really want to connect with you, and we've got some engaging polling questions we're going to be asking you. So please submit your questions for the panelists for the Q&A portion. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Simon.
Great, thanks, Chris. And certainly a big thank you to Chris and the IFMA team, not only for allowing us to speak today, but also for their speed and professionalism in getting this thing set up so quickly. How this came about, I think, is interesting. It goes to the core of what we're going to talk about, which is, how to use data to make better decisions about how, when, and in what sort of different stages you return to the office. When the pandemic really started taking impact, we at Newmark Knight Frank decided that we wanted to do something to help initially our clients, and it's grown so much that we've now, as Chris mentioned, made our situation report available to anybody who wants it. So anybody on this call, reach out to me and I can give you a demo and access. And the core of the situation report was very, very simple. We found that we would be spending time going in and looking at websites and trying to understand the pandemic statistics, then going to a different site or a spreadsheet and looking at portfolios and saying, okay, how does this correlate? Very simply, we brought those two things together so that you can see your buildings and even your employee locations with the pandemic data in one single area. As Chris mentioned, it's available free of charge. And we'll talk today just a bit about how some of those data components and examples have already helped clients in making these decisions. We don't want this to be a webinar where we pontificate on the future and what's going to happen post-COVID, because frankly, nobody knows. What we want to do is give you our experience and knowledge around how data can help you and help you through this process. So that's a big core of what we're looking at. I collected a great group of people that you may or may not be familiar with, all relative or all experts in their relative areas. So I definitely want everybody to just sort of spend 30 seconds to introduce themselves and their background, and we'll start with Nishar.
Thank you very much, Simon. Lovely to meet all of you virtually today. My name is Nishar Fatima. I manage global accounts for Space Matrix for all the projects in Asia Pacific for design and build. And I'm really enthusiastic about technology-driven solutions, and which is why I think this particular topic is very, very interesting to me. I spent some time in Singapore, 3.5 years, and then I was based out of Germany for about a year. I'm originally from India, and now I have opportunity to be in North America. So I'm just excited to dissect all the canvases today.
Great, thanks, Nishar. Luke?
Sure, yeah, I'll echo the thanks. It's great to be here with you guys this morning, and thanks to IFMA for putting this on. Luke Rondell, I'm Director of Channel Partnerships for SaltMine. SaltMine's a technology platform for Workplace, to manage Workplace, and been with the firm a few years now. We're pretty new to the marketplace compared to a lot in the industry. We've been around for about 3 years now. So really exciting to see the firm grow. As Director of Channel Partnerships, I spend most of my time working with others in the ecosystem, so design firms, real estate service providers, as well as our occupier clients. Been in Workplace quite a while, love it, and it's definitely a time in our industry that's going through a ton of change. So I think it's, while there are lots of challenges, it's also a really exciting time with a lot of opportunity.
Great, and lastly, Jane.
Hi everyone, nice to be here today. And yeah, I'm with SmartWay too. So my background's very much in change and digital transformation, and I do a lot of speaking and writing about the future of work. So I'm involved in all sorts of things at SmartWay too, including growth and strategy and thought leadership. So we've been working on a lot of stuff around helping people plan a safe return to work, and it's great to see so many people here today. So thank you very much for showing up, and it's nice to. We're just saying before we started going live here that people are actually making more effort to connect with each other online these days. So so it's a really good opportunity for us all to get together and think about how we're going to crack this.
Great, thanks, Jen. You talk about sort of getting together and connectivity and some of the new changes. My 3.5-year-old just came in, and I had some cherries in a bowl that I was going to eat off camera when I had a second, and she came in, took all 5 of them, and just walked straight out without saying a word. We are going to talk a bit about sort of impacts of work from home as we go through this. One thing I do want to say, we have 650 people plus on the webinar. So as Chris mentioned, if you have questions, feel free to fire them in the chat. What I'm going to do my best to do is sort of view those as they come in. And if the question is pertinent to the subject we're talking about, then we'll try and get it addressed as part of the section. If not, we do plan on leaving a good amount of time at the end to go through those. So please ask any questions you have. Great. With that, Chris, next slide. So yeah, we're going to talk about how data can help you with determining reboarding. And I think certainly for those of us like myself in the US, this situation is changing on an almost daily basis. We're going to talk about tips and tricks on technology maturity. But I think it's important to know that really everything we're going to talk about today, you can do if you needed to with a pen and paper or an Excel spreadsheet, right? This is not a webinar to try and sell you anything. This is a webinar to give you some of those component pieces. Clearly, if you have data like CAD drawings that we'll talk about, then it makes the process quicker. But it's all doable without those components. And really talk as well about real life examples of how this has worked. One of the closest sort of to me is, despite my accent, I actually live in Phoenix, Arizona. And I'm sure many of you may have heard both nationally and internationally that Phoenix has become a bit of a hotspot in relation to COVID. Well, about 3.5 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I guess, I knew that because I live here. And I also knew that because I'm demoing a system every day with the data, and I always use my own county. And actually, to the extent that one of our clients, when I was talking them through the system, they hadn't realized how impacted Phoenix and Scottsdale had been, and were actually looking to reopen their offices. And I said to them, take a look at this information, right? So the data can really help understand those things on a macro level to what you should be doing or what you should be considering. And then finally, today we're going to have that open discussion Q&A at the end. So looking forward to it, and looking forward to giving you sort of access to these 3 amazing individuals. So we do want to have a sort of quick polls as well, and so it's always interesting to see the responses on here. So the first one we're going to look at is really, as an individuals, and if you represent a service provider or a third-party firm potentially where your main clients are, but where are you in the process of reboarding? So have you determined when you're going to open, or if you've not even done that as yet? Have you started planning for a future date? Have you started reboarding? So I've just loosely used phase 1 as bringing back less than 25% of the staff for the building, and phase 2 being less than 50. So the options are, yeah, not determined when you're going to open, you've started planning because you have dates, you've already started phase 1, or you're in phase 2. So if you could respond to those, and then I'll have the panel interpret those responses. I feel like I should have the Jeopardy music in the background, but no, Chris will open it up once we have a good quorum of responses. Okay, great. Interesting spread. I think again, and not knowing exactly where all of the attendees are from geographically, and we'll talk about some of the different disparities. But I think the planning phase has maybe started and stopped for some, right? So now we're looking at those dates. an interesting number. I think anecdotally, I'm sort of seeing that a lot of people haven't even determined those dates, but it's interesting to see that with a more empirical. I guess for me personally, and I'll throw this to Nishar because it may be related to geographical questions, but for me it seems like a pretty interesting and maybe larger than I would have perceived number of people that are already in the 25 to 50% return. But Nishar, you have great visibility to probably some of the regions that are opening quicker. So just wondered what your thoughts are on, or what numbers and information you've seen about people that are starting to return at that level, and maybe some of the considerations around that.
Absolutely, Simon. I think this is interesting poll because probably if the audience is more directed to North America, that's where we are saying started planning for the future dates, right? And I honestly feel that just as much we are relying on the data science to navigate out of our way out of the pandemic, we can and we should use data science to be making informed decisions about our future of the workplace. And I just wanted to take a moment to kind of open up the macro strategies and talk about where the pandemic has begun, China, right? And what are their strategies and how data-driven approaches they have taken for reboarding. So they have been using contact tracing, where relying on data to identify the infected with individuals and families, or even it goes to the bigger, larger picture, to the point where they are tracking down the cities of which city to lock down, right? And all that is happening because of the data-driven approach. Another interesting one, which I come to, I learn every day from my offices from Beijing and Shanghai, and that they are talking about QR code system, which is new to, we haven't reached there yet, but it's almost like a health barometer for each individual in China, where they have QR code system in every phone, and it is color coded. So if your QR code system is per se green, that means you're healthy and you're allowed in public spaces like restaurants and malls. But if your QR code system flashes orange or red, then they restrict you from those public places. And I think this is a great example of making a data-driven decision where you could stop, or you could stop the spread of the infection, at least if you can't prevent it, right? So in that perspective, I feel it's when we are talking about data-driven approaches, this is, to me, those Asian countries are a little bit ahead of the curve where it comes to making those decisions in a very informed manner rather than just being.
No, I think that's great, and I think as well, it's an interesting thing that we'll see more and more of, right? We'll put aside sort of the any of the other connotations of those tracking aspects, but certainly it seems that the countries that have come out fast have been able to put something in place to ensure that they're not going to have repeats, or if they do have a flare up, they can actually adequately address that. So that's great. Excellent. So first thing we're going to talk about is that sort of that workforce level, and what we're talking about here really is mapping those data elements that I mentioned at the start. So where are your facilities located, and where are your employees, right? Whether I'm sure in many cases now, probably still working from home. But understanding those sort of dynamics as you look at how do you open up, because I think one of the things that we've certainly seen is it's not just a case of saying, yep, my building is in this zip code and we have a low number of new occurrences and therefore we can open, right? How are people actually going to get to the office is going to be a very big consideration. So, if you're in a large metropolitan, how are your employees going to be able to get in? And how can those data elements help you make those decisions? And then I think also looking at, sort of where are teams and business units and individuals located. So when we look at sort of stepped approaches, first step is absolutely around that, right? Is looking at, well, where are we going to focus our efforts based upon the criticality of the business function, okay? You've seen some companies at a macro level, companies like Twitter and Salesforce, et cetera, say, look, you can work from home for as long as you want. There are other companies that don't necessarily have the same infrastructure. There might be equipment that people need. So I think the first thing is looking at, criticality of facilities and mapping that information out. Now that can be done at a macro level. That can be done, with any kind of tool, even like a spreadsheet. Then the critical aspect really is overlaying the information. So tracking the information, and I deliberately use the word tracking of the data overlays, because as we all know, this is changing on an almost daily basis in a lot of areas. And we can get a lot of early indicators in terms of, what those issues might be. So taking the information, excuse me, on a regular basis from sources of repute, with Newmark, we use the Humanitarian Data Exchange, which is actually an amalgam of data for our global data. For the US, we're using data that's more driven by the CDC. And actually in the UK specifically, we're using data that's driven by the NHS Trust. So I think one thing to look at is really, what level of data do you need to and want to get down to, right? If you're a predominantly UK-based company or you have a lot of facilities in different parts of the country, then that's going to be a lot more relevant to you, because those those county by county determinations are going to be very important. And then the reason that we do track these hotspots is to understand those direct impacts, right? So unfortunately, this isn't a static one-time exercise when you can say, yep, my facilities are here, my cases are here, let's just decide what we're going to do, right? You have to do this on a daily basis, just to see where things are changing. And then I think as we get into the criticality and the aspects, the geographical variance, it wasn't actually deliberate that we have people representing or with experience of sort of, the Americas, Asia and Europe on this call. But I think, understanding that things are varying geographically. Jane, perhaps you could maybe talk a bit about where you are in Europe and what you're seeing sort of in terms of opening strategies, and then Nishar maybe comment on what you're seeing for your Asian clients, and Luke, I'll let you focus on the US.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the wilds of central Portugal at the moment. So, I mean, obviously everywhere in Europe and in the UK, it's all very different stories. And I think even more than it being a geographical thing by country, when an outbreak happens, it happens at a very local community level, doesn't it? So so everyone is really feeling it in different ways, just down to each village, I would say, in each town. I mean, in Portugal, we're sort of on the third phase now, and if you're walking around the streets, you'll see people with masks on. You're supposed to wear a mask if you're over 10 years old. Shops have opened, cafes have opened, hotels are functioning, albeit a little bit empty. But in terms of people, I think there's still this attitude generally across Europe of, if you can work from home, continue to do so, and the infrastructure is pretty decent where I am. But yeah, I think the key really is just to maintain that adaptability, which is what the data gives us, really, is that ability to flex and change almost day by day. But certainly here, I mean, there's been in terms of the impact here in comparison to the UK or to the US, we're in a better spot. We locked down slightly earlier, and there's been a lot of compliance with all the measures that have been put in place. So people are going about their business here, but I think there's still a reticence to show up in the office or to, Lisbon, for example, sort of reinstated some stricter measures around bigger group gatherings. So you can see that there'll be a bit of whack-a-mole for a while, keeping an eye on the data and seeing what happens, and then screwing things down a bit tighter where they're needed. So that's kind of what I'm seeing right now from a Portugal point of view.
Nishar, for your clients in Asia, what differences are you seeing in different countries and how they're tackling it? And I think it'd also be great, I know we'll talk about this more, but just sort of to get a macro perspective on where and how people are working in Asia, and I think the culture of the office being different, frankly, from my own personal experience to the US.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in Asia, what's happening is that every country are running on a different time as per se when it comes to talking about hitting by pandemic, right? So China is completely open like nothing happened. India, if I talk about, they are closed on precautionary basis. Countries like Singapore are on circuit breaker period. They are closing and they are opening up based on the infection rates. So just to take a real life example of some of the clients I was talking to, and just to respect the confidentiality, they were a couple of banking clients, and they rolled out a survey for their global employee to just ask whether, do you even want to come back, how safe you feel. And the results of the collection of the findings were very, very interesting, because they said that countries like Asia, average houses sizes are somewhere between 600 feet to 1,000 square feet with multi-generational. So you have your kid and your grandparents running around you at the same time, right? And it becomes really inconvenient for you to have calls like this today. Versus in US, if you the average houses would be somewhere around 2,500 square feet if we look at the Central America and all the other regions. And there is a vast difference between how people would have experience working from home. So the leaders or CRE leaders have much more pressure to bring back the force in Asia, just based on that data which they have seen, to be able to open up their workplaces real soon. And that's what exactly is happening, that they don't have choice but to rely on data to bring back their forces. That's where China's and countries like Singapore have started coming back to work already. It might be phase 1 or phase 2, which is about 25% or up to 50%, but it's really, really minimal. And I think data-backed diagrams can help employer and employee build the confidence they need to come back and answer the questions like who needs to come back first, and when do they come back, and how to keep them safe.
Yeah, great. And Luke, from the US perspective, I think we've got a good number of attendees from the US. So.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think probably what I'd add to the conversation, is that it's become really apparent that specificity is really important when dealing with this. And geographically speaking, as Simon, as you kicked off our webinar today, speaking about, things change on a daily basis, as in Arizona, where you are in Phoenix, and being able to respond to those sort of in real time and being able to address a specific employee population of a particular firm is critical in order to do this successfully. So yes, we are dealing with a pandemic, and that the stimulus is the same in the form of the virus across the world. But I think the successful customers of ours and clients that we've seen respond to this do so with a very specific approach that's tailored to their particular needs and their particular location. So the poll that we kicked this off with, I think, was similar. It was a bit surprising to me that there's that large of a group of companies that's in what we were calling phase 2, so 25 to 50% back in the office. I thought that would be a little bit lower, but the spread really wasn't that surprising to me, that some companies are still, are in this position where they're saying, hey, because of our population and the work that we do and our culture, we don't even have a date that we're working towards yet. We're still monitoring the situation. We're still understanding what's going to happen over the summer and then back into the fall, and then we're going to make a decision. I'm fortunate to work for a company that is truly global, and so we have the infrastructure to work remotely. I mean, candidly, the shift from working in an office regularly to working from home for me and my colleagues operationally wasn't that big of a change. Culturally, it was a huge change. Definitely that's a big component to not seeing my colleagues and not connecting face to face in those elements, which we'll talk about as we move forward. But operationally, we're in a position where this shift wasn't that big of a change to our day to day. My wife works for a company that is very much location based, right? So very much in the office, collaborative working. That was their norm before the pandemic. And so hats off to them. They've done a great job in transitioning, but it was a big transition for that firm. So I guess I would say, in talking about sort of in the US, I think, and I'm sure this holds true for much of the rest of the world, but specificity is really important. And so drilling down, we're talking about data today, but drilling down into the data about a particular workforce, a particular company in a particular location, even down to the neighborhood level, has been the determinants of successful approaches that I've seen so far.
Great. Yeah, and I think just a few things to add. I mean, first, I think, Jane's whack-a-mole analogy is, I think, perfect, right? Because we are seeing that, right? You're effectively looking at a board of data, and occasionally something's spiking up, and the quicker you can see and respond to that, the likely better result you're going to get. And I think what we're seeing here is really the considerations that we need to think about, right? So it's not just simply a case of understanding, and these aren't easy things necessarily to understand, but it's not just understanding where your facilities are, where your employees are, where the hotspots are. It's also understanding that local level and local knowledge in terms of, how is reopening classified in different areas? What does it mean? I mean, Phoenix, again, just to use an example, Arizona, we never had a lockdown. We had a stay at home. I could still golf during Phoenix's lockdown, which is very different than my colleague's experience in Panama, where he's still only allowed out of the house for 2 hours a week on a prescribed basis. So we need to understand more of those aspects. And I think having, the local resource and information, so certainly if you're not already, reaching out to people just to understand those aspects, because there are likely going to be cultural challenges and social challenges about getting back. Anybody who's read anything on my LinkedIn, and please, for anybody listening that wants to add any of us on LinkedIn, we're all open to that. I'm not a fan of the work from home experiment language that's been used in a lot of articles, because really this is just such a false experiment, because we have very different parameters based on our own personal experiences. Based on how is the lockdown, do you have children of school age? Do you have the ability to have somebody watch your children? Do you have a robust internet access? Do you live with your grandparents and the rest of your family, and you just don't have the same flexibility? So people, I think, are incorrectly in some instances looking at sort of the efficiencies that have come out of working from home. But in my personal opinion, I think people are working just a lot more hours because there's also, frankly, not a lot of other things to do right now. So I think be very cautious about drawing any conclusions based on data related to sort of the work from home side. We do want to drill into that a little bit more, though. So our next polling question, Chris, if you could advance to that. So, and again, this is why I use the inverted commas here in terms of work from home. But what are you missing most with the current sort of experience? Is it having a normal day routine? I know for me, my routine has changed significantly. Typically, I'm on the road. Are you missing those face-to-face social interactions? Are you missing having a variety of places where you can work? Or are you missing the ability to collaborate with colleagues? I think just as we wait for those responses, in relation to the first poll, I'm a data guy, and it would be awesome to actually drill further into that and look at those areas where they are maybe 25 to 50% reboarding to understand whether it's anything correlation in relation to geography or type of client, type of industry, or even the work that's being performed, because I think all of those things take impact as well. If you're a knowledge worker or a knowledge worker company, then you probably can function relatively easily in a home environment. But if you're more obviously something that's hands-on manufacturing or something that's high security, then there may be things that you just can't do without being inside the confines of the normal work experience. So yeah, again, what do you miss most? Is it the normal routine, face-to-face interaction, variety of places to work, or the ability to collaborate with colleagues? Okay, great. Again, really interesting to see. I've been tracking this myself, and I'm on day 110. And definitely the face-to-face social is a big piece of what I miss. I actually work with a team that we do a lot of our work remotely, so but we spend a lot of time on the road, so you get to see people, experience people, you get to meet clients. In a sales position, it's always good seeing the whites of somebody's eyes when you're discussing things with them, and certainly that's an area that I'm seeing as a social side. The collaboration pieces and normal day routine, I think are also things that people that do have a regular working environment miss. But Nishara, I'm going to throw this over to you. Just really, firstly, in your interpretation of the results, and then I know Space Matrix have been doing additional work around getting data on people's experience. So anything else you'd like to share on that would be great.
Absolutely, Simon. So we rolled out a survey to almost 2,700 individuals in the industry to find out what they are thinking, what their employees and what their people are thinking by large, right? And the long-term findings, we divided into near-term findings, long-term findings, and then work from home experience. And for the near-term findings, it was pretty much addressing a phased re-entry into the work environment. That took almost 60 to 70% of the precedent over all the other issues. And when it comes to long-term findings and considering in what ways do we see the workplace changing, how will employee behaviors will change, almost pretty much it was a reassessment of the working from home environment or investing in communication technologies that took the precedent over all the other options. And when it comes to work from home experience, as much as people love, the most miss is the collaborative aspect, right? The face-to-face interaction. And at the end of the day, the goal of the workplace is to get things done. The first step is to understand who works together and who doesn't interact on the regular basis, and combining that worker's opinion with an objective data lends insight to, in my opinion, mapping a better future and making smarter decisions for the employer. So that's where I feel it's reminding me of Winston Churchill's saying in 1943. He said that we shape our buildings, therefore they shape us, right? And after 77 years later, nothing has changed. It still stands true. And but now we have technology to help us understand the countless ways to sort of plan our reboarding, if you will.
Great, yeah, and you know, I think it's you know, it's an important point to consider, right? Is how do we sort of take the experiences of our teams, of our employees, of our workforce into consideration as we start planning, right? It's not simply a case of just saying, yep, we're going to start moving back on mass. It's going to be understanding, you know, how are people performing effectively right now. I would definitely agree. I think one of the things that we miss in life by not being in the office is, you know, what you can call the casual collisions. You know, those sort of offhand conversations, discussions, you know, hearing somebody mention something on the phone that you can help with. We're missing on those things. And although you can do some artificial things to enhance collaboration, and again, just as an aside, you know, my organization, which is predominantly work from home based, we actually have started doing things like having a social hour every other week and having a coffee morning where you have 15 minutes and you're assigned to somebody that you don't normally work with, and your only rules is you're not allowed to talk about work. And I think those things have really driven a better culture for us, right? And there are ways that you can do those things. But yeah, I think when we get back to sort of the consideration on the workplace, you know, maybe Nishar and Luke can sort of comment on this, but the next phase down after you go from determining the facilities and the employee base is actually looking at, okay, well, what does occupancy mean? And who should we consider bringing back? So, you know, perhaps firstly, Nishar, on the, you know, how you determine who should come back, what ideas and thoughts and recommendations do you have in that arena?
I think my biggest one, when people say that, you know, let's raise the panels around the workstation to make our employees safe, I feel that that's a very short-sighted approach, in my opinion. You know, understand what your people really needed, how they want to interact, and companies are basically a compilation of, or they are made up of the culture. Otherwise, Google's won't be different from Facebook's and so on, right? So in my opinion, it's really, if you are an employer listening to us today, just ask your employees what they really wanted and then apply those data into your planning aspect. And that itself will help you derive into what kind of workplace you want to build for your future. And I'm sure, Luke, you will share more information about the social distancing and, you know, being a precautionary measures on going forward in terms of planning aspects. So I really feel that ask more questions and be aware of what's happening rather than jumping into the short-sighted decisions. I was talking to a few of the pharmaceutical organizations, and they were saying that we are going to take slow and steady. We are not rushing. We want others to make right. First move, and we want to learn from that. So there are a lot of precautionary measures have been considered going forward. But Luke, I would love to hear from you as well on the social distancing piece.
Yeah, thanks. Happy to jump in. In a previous life, I was a workplace strategist, so I could talk about this sort of specific strategies for the workplace for much longer than the 28 minutes we have left. But I think probably more useful for this conversation is the data element to the approach. And I would say, you know, there's not one right answer. Sort of building off of that idea of specificity and the importance of that in making a decision for a particular company. I think the most important thing with workplace planning is transparency, number one. So being able to really understand what your particular workplace is, what the portfolio is, being able to look at key metrics and key data about that at an aggregate level, and then to be able to run a whole variety of different scenarios about what might best work given your unique situation. So, you know, as we've seen in the last couple weeks, the macro environment is going to continue changing. Like we don't have a steady state. We don't have an answer at this point in terms of, you know, what's going to be happening a month, 6 months, 12 months down the road. And so I think having the ability to have that transparency, that visibility into your portfolio, and then to be able to run scenarios is hyper important. So, you know, the customers we've been working with have been applying a variety of different protocols, you know, whether it's in terms of physical distancing, whether it's 6 feet between people, 7 feet between people, looking at circulation paths running throughout the space. All of those are really critical. as are things like signage and sanitating, hand sanitizing stations. Those are as important in many ways, because those start to deal with the cultural, the sort of human element of being in the workplace. So I think the protocols element is like, look, if it's a CDC or the WHO, there will be defined parameters, I guess, that workplaces need to align with in order to be safe environments for people to occupy. That's one piece of it, and I think having the right tool set to manage that is really important. There's also all the cultural elements then, right? So Nishar, to your point, connect with your employees, right? Like see what they want, what they're comfortable with, what their preferences are. I think I mentioned at the top of the hour, there's a lot of opportunity right now, and I think some of that opportunity is a bit of a reset, is a bit of a look, we've broken out of our daily routines. We're not commuting into the office. Our last poll, I thought it was a little amusing that having that daily routine is not something that most people miss. So most people don't miss the commute to the office. So, I think it's an opportunity to reset some of this. We've all built a lot of muscles for, from work from not the office, whether that's home or wherever you've been. So I think there's an opportunity to make some changes here. Certainly aligning your workplace to essentially a new set of codes that are going to be applied is really important. And then taking advantage of this to say, hey, our population is going to change and it's going to continue changing. And so how can we think of workplace a bit more broadly and a bit more flexibly than we did perhaps before this, and take the opportunity to evolve it. And now I don't think it's just higher screens between cubicles. I think it's a more sophisticated evolution than that.
Yeah, I think some of those sort of reactive determinations and decisions are not necessarily the best way to go. As we sort of talk tips and tricks, I'll add a couple of my own. I think one of the key ones really here is establishing a baseline, right? You need to understand, on a normal day with all of your seats available, what is the threshold of the population? How many people can you bring back into a building, right? So you have to understand that basis again, whether it be in an Excel spreadsheet or a CAD drawing. Then you need to determine out of that, based upon protocols, as Luke mentioned, including CDC, NIOSH, etc. How many people could you optimally bring back in? So even if you were just applying a 6-foot distance ring to each space, what does that take your 100% down to? Maybe it takes you down to 50. Doesn't mean you have to reboard at 50%. You might want to reboard, as a friend of mine mentioned, their company's reboarding at 10% is the max they're going to do before March of next year. And then I think from the planning side, getting down to saying, okay, if it is 10%, and let's say it's 10% of 100 to make it easy, because I'm not very good at math, but if you're bringing back in 10 people, who are the most critical to the business to be in the office, right? Not necessarily who has the most seniority and who would like to be back in the office because they don't want to be dealing with the kids, but who's important to the operation of the business. And then as Luke mentioned, using those protocol rules to then determine how the space should be laid out, what should be used, what shouldn't. Jane's going to talk a bit in a moment when we get down to that sort of level. But, in my instance here about protocols, meeting room utilization is not, how often it's being used, but what are you using them for, right? So are you temporarily using them as offices? Are you going to put a temporary partition in place so you can put 2 people in a meeting room and work? I've certainly heard anecdotally from friends that are back or started reboarding, that they're still doing all their calls via whatever sort of web conferencing tool. They just sat in their office or sat in their cubicle instead of being sat at home. To me, does that really add anything? Does that add any benefit? And then as you look at the phase side, looking at those same aspects. So sorry, Luke, go ahead.
No, it's fine. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to jump on that and say, I do think, I think the function of the workplace, of the office, if you will, is going to change dramatically, where to your point, I don't think most of us are going to go back to the office to do heads down work for most of the time. So sometimes, absolutely, with family in the house, or if we don't have, ergonomic settings that support us for the whole day, certainly there will be times we want to do heads down work or focus work in the office. That said, I think predominantly the office is going to shift to be a more collaborative environment. Right. So it's going to shift to be that face-to-face meeting. We've got, whiteboards up and Post-it notes on the walls. That's what we're going to make the commute and go into the workplace to actually do. So I think Interestingly, all of that is exactly what we, or paradoxically maybe, that's what we can't do right now, because it's being face-to-face that actually is the, is the danger. So, so I think we don't have an answer yet, but to your point, Simon, I think the function of the office, it's certainly who's doing critical roles in bringing them back in first, probably, but then it's also like, what are those real critical activities that need to take place face-to-face or would benefit from taking place face-to-face?
Yeah, and that's a great add. Excellent. Okay, let's move on to the next poll question. And while we're doing that, certainly please feel free again to ask any questions that you have. So, for me, I think one of the biggest concerns for anybody in the current day and age is really, there's life out there isn't what it was before the pandemic, and we're looking at really what concerns people have about returning. So. To Luke's point, and this wasn't set up, but it brings perfectly in. So what are your biggest concerns? Is it that inability to collaborate? Is it the physical aspect of getting to the office? Or is it that overall risk benefit of return? I certainly as well, if you're anybody like us and you're in a business where you're going out and meeting clients, even if the client wants you to come into the office, you don't want to be the person that, potentially is responsible for any additional issues or spikes within a company. So what are your thoughts about, the biggest concerns? Is it the inability to collaborate because this office won't be set up like it used to be? Is it getting in, or is it overall? Nishar, we have had one question which I really like, so thank you, Michael G. Could you repeat the Churchill quote that you just gave?
Sure. He says that we shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us. That's what he said in 1943.
Yeah, I think that's great. So we shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us. And I think it's so true. We've talked a little bit, just as an aside to fill the time, about those cultural aspects, right? And having a workplace is always going to have a cultural draw, good or bad, frankly. But I read a lot recently about sort of some changes, and I do think that's still going to be a big piece. Wow. Okay, great. Interesting responses again, and nice to sort of be surprised as always. But the risk benefit of return, I think that's probably most people's their own individual human reaction, right? Is it worth it? Do we need to go back? What are we going to get that we don't have? Jane, love you to comment on that.
Well, I mean, it strikes me really that it's as much a psychology challenge as it is a technology or business or a data challenge, really, isn't it? Because I mean, there's the issue of who comes in, but there's no doubt that whoever comes in, you need to make sure the office is a safe place. And then in terms of, so there's two sort of sides to that, I think. I mean, there's certain things that you need to do in order to make the office a safe place, so that people see that they can come back and not have anxiety about it. I imagine if you're caring for an elderly parent, for example, you're probably more anxious about going to the office than if it's just you and you at home. And there's all these different nuances to every individual situation. So I think we need to do everything we can to make the workplace safe. That's an obvious thing we need to do, and there's many ways we can use data to drive that. But also in terms of who comes into the office, that's also a psychological question as well, because like you say, you've got 100, say you've got an office with a capacity of 100 people, and typically everyone has a desk, so there's 100 desks. If you've decided that with social distancing you can only have a percentage of those desks occupied, say a quarter of them, do you decide, okay, a quarter of our workforce can come back full time, who's that? Or do you just say, do you decide that half of our workforce can come back half the time, who's that? And when we say who's that, are we determining that some people are more critical than others based on what? Based on, what client projects they're working on and what the value of that project is, or based on, their position, their role? It could be whether obviously there's high priority for people who have specific equipment or stuff that they need at the office that they can't access at home. But then, there's the layer of, well, what do people want, and how do they feel about it? And that's a data question as well. We need to gather that data, that sentiment data. So there's many layers to this, but I think it's really important. Almost this bottom up is really important, of how does each individual feel? Are they anxious about coming to the office? Are they anxious about being at home because their productivity is suffering? And so we need to, we need that data in order to be able to communicate with people, as well as be able to plan priority in terms of who gets the desk and who gets the access to the room. We need to, be able to communicate with them. We could almost think of it like there's personas, if you of different people, and they have different needs, they have different desires, and there are needs and desires. If I'm working in a lab and I have equipment needs, that is a need. But I also have a desire to get to the office because I've got 3 generations of family in my household, or
Right.
there's so many nuances, I think. But that's why I think it is as much a psychology challenge as a technology and data challenge, and that this requires a new type of leadership. It's leading complex change, and it's and crisis leadership, which is slightly different to your norm. And it doesn't need a hero. It needs a listener. It needs
Right.
a facilitation to hear all those voices. And I think that's one of the most critical elements of the change as well.
Yeah, I think those macro change requirements are something that a lot of people are missing in the sort of the rush to come to a solution. And I think, as you say, they're very critical. My belief on the future of this as we move into the FM considerations is very much that in the past, right, if you're in the FM world, in the past, it's always been the best that if nobody sort of hears from you or nobody's shouting at you, then you're doing a great job.
You did a good job.
Yeah, and I think for those psychological considerations, people are going to be a lot more conscious of, is this desk clean? Is somebody going around sanitizing?
Absolutely.
Is the hand sanitizer available? Is there a protocol for using elevators? Because the biggest issue I've seen macro in the US is when people don't know what they should be doing, they're not always doing the right thing or the best thing. So I think from the FM side, the FMs on the call, they've probably seen this already, but you're going to get a lot more visibility in terms of the work you're doing.
For sure.
We've really talked, sort of at the macro level, identifying the locations, then getting down a level to identifying, the right individuals. So the last sort of piece of the formal part is going to be talking about, when they do go back, what are they going back to? So there's obviously a lot of facility considerations. We really focused on the ones we thought that we were best at, and areas where we felt data can help. So Jane, I think with a sort of the continuing veil of what you discussed around sort of change, how are you seeing, or what sort of considerations do people need to put in play in relation to how they're managing things like conference rooms, and if they go to a hot desking model, how they're going to track those aspects?
Well, I've certainly seen a lot more people talking about hot desking. Any organization that didn't have bookable resources before is certainly thinking, generally speaking, about bookable resources now. If you can book something in advance, obviously what that does is it means that people are not going to just show up and think they can come in and then possibly be turned away because we're at full capacity for this floor or what have you. You don't want people to get to that point of going through that journey and the risks involved in that potentially before being turned away. You want people to be able to sit at home if they're at home now and be able to pre-book what they need. That's a great way of being able to intervene in the process as well, because then you can have the opportunity to possibly gather data on why do you want to come in and use this desk?
Right.
Why do you want to come in and use that room? And then you can approve that request. So not only can you gather the reason why, because it's not productive for me to be working at home, or I really need to be in the office because there's this piece of equipment I need to use. So if you gather data before people actually show up, then you have the ability to better support them in getting what they need and forecasting that need as well. And that you can put a layer of approvals processes in too, because obviously if you have 1,000 people in an office and you're trying to sort of manage priorities, that's pretty hard going. So maybe you have a layer of management that can take responsibility for one geographical area in the office, for example, maybe one neighborhood in the office, for instance. So they're like, okay, I've got to approve these, the access that these 12 people can have, and I'll do that in priority order. And then maybe if all the desks in this area don't fill up, I can release them to other people. So that's where I think a lot of organizations are thinking, okay, we need to make hot desking available to our people so that they can pre-book what they need, ideally on their own mobile phones, because we don't want people touching
Right.
touching screens if we can help it. We don't want people walking up to a reception desk and trying to arrange to book something if they can help it. We need people to be able to use their own devices where they possibly can, is another aspect to it. So
yeah, and I think they're great points, and again, don't necessarily need specific technologies or tools to help with that, right? I mean, I've seen a couple of examples that I think are very interesting. One is simply a client where they've essentially said, look, all of our people are assigned spaces, so these people are allowed in this week and these people are allowed in the next week, and they've just simply gone through and done a checkerboard and said, yep, week 1 is you, week 2 is you. I've seen another one as well where a client, they've set up a very simple system, almost like when you go to the dairy or the meat and cheese aisle at the grocery store, where you basically every night you can go and you can log into their system and you can apply to be in the office the next day. If you get one of the available slots, you print out a little form or have it on your phone that basically you show to security and they let you in. So again, they don't necessarily need to be high-tech solutions, but you need to have the process in place. I think that's great. And then I think on the same basis, things like the utilization side, Jane, how are you seeing utilization of space and cleaning of space being handled?
Well, we're definitely seeing, I've seen a lot of people thinking, how are we going to, they've come with this realization there might be a bit of an imbalance because our capacity is not at full tilt. I mean, we might have 25% capacity people coming into the office. That means that there's likely to be a high demand for desk space and a low demand for collaborative spaces. So that's why people are trying to think how they can repurpose their collaborative spaces. So, you've got to work out, this is the size of the meeting room. Maybe we can have 2 people at either end of the boardroom table or whatever it is. So they're being repurposed as desk spaces and to try and balance that out. We're also seeing people, I think a lot of people are monitoring the capacity of their shared spaces. So for example, say you have a cafeteria and there's social distancing in place in the cafeteria. At some point, you're gonna come to full capacity, and then perhaps provide overspill spaces for people to go and safely eat their lunch. And so I think it's about having this flexibility. I think that's what people are striving for, is how can we use our spaces more flexibly and repurpose areas. It could be that we repurpose areas for storage, meeting rooms as desks, overspill areas for lunch, and rethinking space. You've got this space, you've got to be spread out, and so that's being a bit more creative about the use of space, and also in terms of sanitation. I've seen lots of different things. Some organisations are saying, right, after somebody's used this desk, nobody else can use this desk for 48 hours. Giving you a big window there. Or others that are doing sign off and release procedures. So a cleaner can verify, okay, this desk has now been cleaned, release it back into the pool for someone to be able to use. And then in that sense, there's also the challenge of, okay, well, we know which desks should and shouldn't be used. How do we actually stop someone sitting in one that they shouldn't be sitting in? So, so some organisations are using digital signage for that, to indicate, okay, this desk is off limits because it's waiting for cleaning or what have you. So needing clear indicators as to whether you can actually go into a room or sit at a desk.
Yeah, and I think if you have those tools in play, you can certainly, make some of those more sort of critical decisions, right? Because it gets to the point, not only is the room being used, but it's being used the right way. And if you do have sensors in play, you can see if a 8-person conference room has 5 people in it. I like also the theory on the booking side, because that helps you with what Nishar mentioned earlier on contact tracing. And as I say, I think at the outset, right, the things we've discussed, you can do with any type of tool. The level of sophistication is going to help you, I think, get to those determinations faster, which is good, but it doesn't necessarily require investment in specific technologies to do a lot of these things. We are starting to get questions through, so I want to use the opportunity to just firstly ask as well, if there are any additional questions, then please put them in there. But I'll go through these, the ones that we can pull out in the next sort of 5 minutes. Robert, not so much a question, I think a great point. He said, logistically, what are you concerned about with returning to the office? None of the responses are applicable. The main issue is dealing with people's fears and misconceptions of the hazards. Anybody want to comment on that specific? I think it's a great point. I don't know if Robert wanted a comment on that, but I certainly agree. Education is vital to understanding what you know, how people are going to be using spaces, good and bad, right? So, you know,
Yeah, I mean,
not necessarily understanding those pieces. Luke?
I'll just add 30 seconds. I agree as well. I think there are multiple layers of consideration coming back to the office. Some of those are more of the tactical ones in terms of actually containing the virus, making sure cleaning surfaces, you know, surfaces are clean, desks are empty when they're supposed to be emptied. Those are really important. I think the cultural element is huge. I think in terms of communicating to an employee base plan, you know, giving them confidence that that the plan has their best interests in heart, takes their concerns and fears, as Robert talked about, into consideration, and responds to those. And then having that just open and transparent communication. So finding new ways to connect with connect organizations across organizations, I think is absolutely critical. And you know, I do think there's maybe the earliest date we possibly could come back safely, and I believe that, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the right date to come back, because it might be very important to keep in consideration sort of the fears or the perceptions of a group of people, right? The specific group of people that are working for an organization, and there's a lot of psychological elements to that as well.
Yeah, I think that goes well.
Really, sorry.
Go ahead, Jane.
It really sort of, it'll be interesting to see how it really crystallizes the culture of your organization in a way, because you could take the line that, okay, we're saying now it's safe to come back, we've put these measures in place, so we want you to come back, and that's it, you have to come back now. You know, there's that one extreme, and then there's the other end of the extreme where you can stay at home for as long as you want, everything's good, you know, stay where you. So, and there's everything in between in that spectrum. And so this really speaks to, you know, what kind of organization do you want to be, what kind of leaders do you want to be, and what kind of culture do you want to create here. And so it's very much a communications challenge, really, isn't it? You know, being able to keep those lines of communication open, and survey all the time, not just survey once, but survey continuously for feedback.
Yeah, I think the communication is key, and really telling people what to expect, right? I mean, one of the things that I saw, and a friend of mine sent me a video because it was something we were talking about, but I think NIOSH or the CDC recommended, you know, elevators is going to be a pinch area. And I think the best practice is to have 4 people in the elevator, all facing into each individual corner, which seems logical. But if you haven't told your employees to expect that, I'm stepping on that elevator, I'm seeing everybody facing the corner, I'm getting straight off because I don't know what's going on. So
it's weird,
yeah, I think educating, you know, is the key in communicating those things. Nishar, I think this is a good one for you. Steve asked, how do you see the flexibility of the office space and designing them to allow for people to drop in whilst also being able to work remote? How does this play into the equation of bringing people back? So yeah, I guess hot desking, remote working, how does that play into a strategy on reboarding?
I think it's almost ironic that we were working in the closed high panels, and then we started changing that culture to open office and flexibility and agile, and now we are again being told that, hey, wait, that might be questionable already, right? How we are looking at it is spread out, you know, spread out and use the same space, same collaborative space in a multi, you know, different manner. So if you had a meeting room for 8 packs with the central table, for example, you can actually take that table off and spread out the seats in the same real estate of that 8 packs room. That, and as to your point in the elevator, right, how we are spreading out and asking people to be far from each other, that same 8 packs could be used in a very different manner. And it's all about making those smaller changes. I think going forward, change management is going to be a biggest issue, and as you said rightly, Luke, educating your upcoming employee. And as much as this is not a relocation, but your employees have sort of forgot to work in the office from last 4 or 5 months, so you are going to have to do that whole change management piece and re-educate them on how to use the new space, and also a lot of pressure on real estate leaders and design and construction teams to kind of make sure that it doesn't feel like they are forced into the different setup, but they enjoy that fluidity and flexibility within the new place.
Great. There's a lot of questions. I'm going to go through some of these pretty quickly, and then I'll leave a couple for the panel. Patty asked a question about hearing what booking tools we recommend. Patty, feel free to reach out directly, and we can certainly walk you through that. We've done a lot of work in that space, but sort of not wanting to necessarily promote any particular solutions over the phone, but I'd be happy to give you my take on that. Sarah asked a question about distancing protocols in regard to 10 feet and no longer 6 feet. I'm not aware of that. There are probably, Chris might have better resources about those specifics. certainly where we as a company are looking at our CDC and NIOSH regulations. And then there's a couple of other questions. Joshua, again, not necessarily an area for this group, but Chris, maybe if you could respond via email, but best solutions for finding cleaning products and alcohol sanitary wipes, what's been effective. So I'll leave those ones with you. I'm going to finish a question here from Laurie. Laurie, it's always good to see your name. Really enjoy the post that you put out there. Question about how do you see organizations governing the rules? We see people setting the policies and putting up signage, but how are they enforcing the rules? That's a tough one. Who wants to take a stab at that one first?
I can talk about based on the experience I had with some of the clients which I have been talking to, right? And if it's a public news where Twitter has said that we are no more, forcing employee to come back, and we are saying that it's a flexible world. You can work remotely and have that. They actually have set it up the entire remote experience team for those who permanently want to remote work. But there are other organizations who are saying that we don't think so. Things are going to change much, and things will be back to normal. And for them, the construction and design work is still going on, and they are implementing the future of workplace, but not to the point of social distancing and spreading out the real estate too much. So I feel like it's going to be individual organizations how they govern their own rules.
Yeah, I'm getting the nod to close things up, and I'll hand back to Chris. I mean, Laurie, I think my personal view is obviously the more data you have, then the better you can prove to people when they're not meeting the rules. And I think a lot of it is going to have to come down to sort of that community aspect. As we're seeing, in the real world right now, right, that people are policing other people that aren't following the protocols and the desired rules. But great question. I want to thank all of you. It's been great. It's been wonderful connecting to plan this. IFMA, Chris, Maureen, particularly, thank you so much. We stood this thing up, I think, in 8 days. So appreciate everything that you guys have done. And I'll hand it back to Chris.
Hey, thanks so much, Simon. And thank you to all the panelists. This is a really, really awesome episode. And a huge thank you to all of the attendees and your great questions. Like Simon mentioned, we weren't able to get to all of them, but we do have our Coronavirus Resource Center, which does answer a lot of those questions. We've got social distancing guidelines. We've got signage and other downloadables and things like that. So please check that resource out. What you see here on the screen, so we're doing a special episode kind of breaking from our standard format next week, and instead of our kind of Wednesday 10 a.m. We're partnering with the Built Environment Technology Alliance, and they'll be hosting a Thursday episode July 16th at 9:30. So please stay tuned for details, and you can use that link to register. And as I mentioned, you can find this episode and all past episodes and a lot of other great content on our Coronavirus Resource Center. Thanks once again to Simon. Thank you, all the panelists, and thank you, audience. And we'll see you next week on Thursday.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.